This week in post, we're comparing several different photos of the same scene that were metered differently. Hey gang, I'm Scott Davenport and welcome to In Post. Thanks for joining me today. Today we're going to do a continuation of In the Field. Earlier this week, took you out to this oak grove where we did several different experiments with metering and what the metering modes in the camera did to render a particular scene. So let's take a look at these exposures in more detail. I've got three that we're going to look at. The first one is the full matrix of light, and the remaining two are spot metering, but choosing different spots in the scene to get the metering. So here are the three photos. From left to right, this is our multi-metering or evaluative or matrix mode. This one's spot metering for a bright area, and this one's spot metering on a shadowed area. And so let's just take a look at the difference in histograms. So for our first one here, let's make that nice and big. This is matrix or multi-mode, and we're just seeing the entire scene. So the camera's looking at all the different points of light and deciding what to expose for. And we can see that our histogram is well bounded. It looks like we've got nice shadows. We've got some highlight details. Of course, we're seeing most things over in the shadow area. So a lot of the shadow in the ground, and of course the tree, which is pretty much backlit in this scene. The sun is kind of over here. We can tell from this bright spot on the tree, things shining in. So all of this shadow area, it's there. There's detail there. But that's the metering and the exposure the camera decided to give us. And they gave us a fifth of a second at f11 and 19 millimeter low ISO. Let's move to the next one. So this is the spot metering. And spot metering, I chose to meter in the bright area. So I slid the camera over, metered this spot here, and then said, great, give me an exposure for making sure I get the detail that's in those highlights. So I'm going to move back to the previous one. So before, we can see this is brighter and the sky is a little bit, not quite blown out, but getting close. And then metering for the highlights, it's pulling in those highlight details. Of course, we're losing a lot more of the shadow. What's going on with the histogram? It's even farther in shadow. Before, and then after. You see that shift to the left. So we get really deep here, and this is almost the opposite of what we want to do for this scene. The whole mantra of exposed to the right. We're crushing down the shadows, and our cameras don't capture as much detail there. The last photo, this was exposed. The spot was done right on the center of this tree, so you can see this is kind of how the scene looked to the eye. This is dark. Moving over to the spot metering, where we spot metered on the tree. Tree's got great detail. We can see everything. We can see the grove floor. Of course, as we expect, the background's completely blown out, and then that histogram certainly shows it. We barely have any shadows, and we're pushing this all the way to the right. And there is probably some clipping up in this area. There almost has to be. This was not a white sky. It was a blue sky. But those differences in the metering mode really changed the way the exposure was. And so now the question to kind of answer here in post is, was that spot metering necessary? Was there enough detail in the multi-mode one, or is it better to kind of expose for the highlights a little bit? And so let's take a look at these. Let's bring this into the develop module, and I'm going to turn on the clipping as soon as I get in here. J key. And sure enough, yeah, we've got clipping up in there. So exposing for the shadows a little bit rough. We probably can rein that in ever so slightly by adjusting the white point and kind of trying to bring that back, but we're just not going to get detail there. So that's what was going on, trying to, let's see if we could balance things out. And if we really crush, the whites and the highlights, we're starting to get some things back there, but it really doesn't have that blue. So metering for the deepest shadow, not the best choice in this scene. Let's take a look at metering for the highlights. Next photo over. So even metering for the highlights, and I chose a highlight area kind of out. These are like moderate highlights. This would have been the brightest area, and we have some detail or some detail lost there, but it's very minimal. And that's probably just a minor adjustment on the highlights, and that's okay. Now the question is, what about this shadow detail? We're going to be able to bring this up reasonably enough. And so let's start working on it. So first, our black point looks good. I actually see a small black point dot right there. So this is really just going to be the shadows area. And what do we get? And I'm pushing this all the way to 100. It's still pretty dark. It's underexposed. Now, could we do more work with this? I'm just going to start to adjust the exposure up. And so I'm almost going up a full stop, and then I'll pull back on the highlights. That's pretty good. That's a pretty nice, well-balanced exposure before and after. Last one is the nominal exposure, which it was pretty similar to the previous one. So we're going to have a same type of dance here. We'll take the whites down just a little bit and rein in the highlights a little bit so we can get those clippings gone there. I don't see a pure black point, so I'll take the blacks. Let's go down and then back that off tremendously. So there's just a couple of little specks of blue. And then we'll start bringing up those shadows again. And I'll just push it up all the way. So what this is telling me, if I compare, let's do a comparison. I'll go back in the grid mode. If Lightroom will catch up for me. Come on, Lightroom. There we go. And let's take a look at these two side by side. And we'll crush that down so we can see. So on the left side is our multi-metering mode, or matrix, or evaluative, whatever your camera calls it. And on the right is metering for the highlights. And as I look at the two, once we've done some basic exposure on it, this looks more natural. So I think when I had said earlier in the field episode, I didn't think I was going to see that much of a difference in the spot metering versus the evaluative or multi-metering, matrix metering. And as I look at these two, I think with just the basic exposures, metering for that highlight spot in this dappled light, that's giving me a better, more natural result to start with. Now, could I, coax and cajole some of that same detail in this photo? This was the multi-metering to this one here. Yeah, I probably could. There wasn't any horrendous clipping going on or so forth. But I'm going to correct myself based on this in-post experiment that in the field, if you are shooting in dappled light, take a look at using that spot metering, or at very least, starting to use your exposure compensation to back off and make sure you're capturing that highlight detail. In this scene, I only had maybe it looks like, what did I have to do here? One stop of exposure adjustment, and that could have been done with my my exposure compensation. So that's the end of the comparison here. So I think that the spot metering does have its place, and certainly now having looked at it from the in-post side of things, there's value in it, and it can give you a rendering that's a little more natural than having to push some of the other sliders a bit too hard. So what about a final edit for this? Actually, I did a live edit of one of these photos last week on the channel. So if you missed that, you can go check that one out and see some of the things I did with the photo to try to bring out the tree, make that jump out more, and add a little bit of a nice glow to the scene. So, but I think the tip of the week, the takeaway is that we do get pretty good latitude with the raw files, and we were able to kind of push just about all of them into a proper direction. But that initial exposure really does have a stronger impact on what you can do in post, keeping things more natural. So tending to try to expose toward the right, don't have to drag the shadows up too far, but keep those highlights in check. So a little different than some of my other in-post videos, but hopefully you enjoyed the bit of the switch up, a little bit of variety, and we learned something together. And that's going to do it for this video. I hope you've enjoyed it. And if you did, please let me know somehow. Comments on the video below. You got questions, you know how to find me. And until next time, my name is Scott Davenport, and happy shooting.